On my quest to find the very best way to build no-code apps, I've been looking at and reviewing various no-code builders. I've been looking at major, well-known and relatively famous no-code builders that are used by lots of people, and many businesses are built using them. But I've been also looking at smaller, lesser known and less famous no-code builders as well, in order to possibly find a diamond in the rough. Now, about a year ago, I first reviewed Thunkable, which is a very unique no-code builder because the way you build apps is done radically different than pretty much all the other no-code builders. Thunkable is also very similar to Backendless, which is another no-code builder that I reviewed as well. In today's video, we're gonna be looking at Thunkable from a perspective of someone who has been using a completely different no-code tool, specifically FlutterFlow. And so we're going to review Thunkable and take a look and see whether this is a tool that warrants your attention. And so here I am on Thunkable's website here, and it says here, no-code mobile app development made easy. And this is a very, very different no-code builder that definitely deserves your attention if you are not familiar with it yet. And so I'm going to go log in. Here I am logged in. I have a couple of sample apps that I developed some time ago. And so what we're going to do is we're going to start with a sample app. So there's some featured projects here, and there's an app called Translate. And so we're going to open this app, and just to give you an idea of how this tool works, okay, just to show you a completed app so that you can better understand what's happening here, okay? So this is an app, and it says here swipe right to begin. So we can swipe this, and now this is a translator, right? So I can pick a language here, and let's say I want Spanish, and I can type anything here in this box. Okay, so I'm gonna say hey there, I'm gonna say translate, and it says hola. In addition to showing you the translation, it also says the word out loud. So if I try something like let's do something tomorrow, we hit translate, it gets you the Spanish translation. And so the next thing you want to do is you want to click on see inside, and now you have the app, you have the environment, you can take a look at how the app is built. Now it says here this project is read-only. So what we're going to do is we're going to say make a copy. And once we do that, we make a copy of this app as though it was an app that we built ourselves. And so the first thing you want to take a look at is we have two tabs. So we have design and we have blocks. On this side, we have the design tab. And as someone who is coming from FlutterFlow, this should be very, very similar to all of you, right? You should be familiar with this hierarchy here, right? Because this thing here applies to design. So we have welcome and we have home. So if I click on welcome, I have the welcome screen. If I click on home, I'm going to have the second screen, right? Which are the two screens here. And then let's say I go back to welcome. I have like an animation here, which is a Lottie animation. FlutterFlow also supports that as well. And here we have a label, which says here swipe right to begin. So if you click on it, you have your settings here, and this is exactly the same thing in FlutterFlow. In fact, FlutterFlow has a couple of different things. You can do logic there and a bunch of other things, but Thunkable only has kind of the settings here, the props, the font size, you know, things like that, the color, and then we have advanced. If we go in here, we have more styling things that we can change essentially. And so that is pretty much all for the welcome screen. Now, if you click on the home screen, it's a little bit more complex. It has a bunch of more things on it, right? So there's an output label, which is where the text is displayed, the translated text. We have the input text right here. We have the translate button, select the language, and we have a list viewer for the languages, right? So if you click on this button, you are shown a list where you pick the language that you want this stuff to be translated into. Next, we have something called invisible components, right? And so these are the components that have logic built in. They do something specific. So like we have a translator here that is kind of like logic, right? You can't really display this component because it's kind of under the hood stuff. But if I click on it, I go to simple, I have some settings for this component. So I have the source language, I have the target language, and I can specify an API key. nothing in advance. And then I have a database. So if I come over here, I can edit this and I see the languages, right? I have the translator, text to speech, and these are the languages that get displayed when I am actually picking my target language. And what else do we have? We have text to speech here as well, which is the part where it actually pronounces the word. So if you think about these are like your components that do something, right? So in FlutterFlow, they would be as part of logic, right? Because this is essentially logic. Here you have they're invisible components, right? Because you have your input, you have your output, but this has nothing to do with the UI. So it's kind of weird, right, to call them invisible components where they should be kind of like logic, right? They should be part of logic, but here on this screen, there's really no logic here, right? And I have more components here, right? So these are the visible components. I also have voice, I have image, and if I scroll down, I have data, right? So if I recall, last time I used Thunkable, I do not remember all of these things. I do not remember Airtable. I do not remember MediaDB. I don't remember File Picker. As far as I remember, it only had local DB and maybe a web API. So right now it has an Airtable. So I can drag and drop it right here. And as soon as I drop it, it's displayed here, which means that now I can use this component. And obviously, I can configure it here. And then when I'm ready to do the actual logic with it, I'm ready to actually work with this component to write data to it, to read data to it. I will be able to do it later in this blocks functionality, which we're going to look at in just a second. So what I want you to pay attention to is this part right here, right? You have these kind of data. This is where you can kind of drag and drop components on. And it's kind of similar to Bubble, where you have plugins and you're essentially dragging like a plugin there and it becomes invisible because you want it to be there, but it's not like a UI element that you can configure. So it's kind of weird if you ask me to kind of drag a component. It's invisible, it's here, but yet, this is kind of my design screen. So I don't know, it's kind of not very, very intuitive. I think a lot of people are going to be like, well, why is this invisible? I mean, I understand it. You may understand it, but it's not the most intuitive thing. And so there's lots of things here. Okay, that's very, very cool. We have map. We have a location sensor. And so, you can kind of think of the screen as you have these visible components, and then you have components that are not visible, not configurable. Person doesn't see them, but they're still components, right? So that's kind of what they have in common. You have visible components and invisible components. So that's kind of the way to look at it, right? So if it's not like completely intuitive at first glance, you want to look at it from a perspective like, okay, these are visible, invisible components, So that's kind of that. Now, let's go into blocks. And this is the part that truly sets a tool like Thunkable apart, okay? Many of these no-code builders are fairly similar. I mean, they're more similar than different, I would say, right? A lot of these no-code builders. But Thunkable and also Backendless and some other ones as well. But these are the major ones. They use something called blocks to do logic, right? So if I go into my home screen, you're going to see all these blocks, right? And this is your logic part. This is where the magic happens. This is where you create conditions where if something happens, do this, if then else, you can do loops. You can do a lot of interesting things. And so on my welcome, I don't see any logic, right? There's no logic there, right? Because that page, there's nothing happening there. But if I go in here to my home screen, right? Remember, the home screen is where all the magic happens. This is where the translation happens. So, if I type something here, I press this button, I press this button, that is displayed, this is displayed. There's lots of logic happens. This is the part where the logic happens. If I go to blocks, this is where, that logic is responsible for. And so we have when home starts, do if this happens, then do that, set this. And so at first glance, this could be a little overwhelming. And so there's some rules here to understand. So there's different colors. And so this is control. This is logic. So if I click on control, I have, first of all, it's different color, but it also has a different shape. So as you can see, it's kind of has this shape here where you insert something into it. So if I drag and drop this, I can't, this needs to be part of something, right? If do this, I need to insert something here, but I also can put something on top. So as you can see, this part here, when, you need to start things with when, because like this block here, it doesn't have any teeth. It doesn't have any insertions around it, right? This one does. So I need to go to control and I need to find something that's gonna be perfect in this case. And so I can pick something like this and I can say duplicate, and then I can duplicate it. Maybe I want to delete all this. I'm gonna say delete. And now I have this when block, and now I can drag and drop and put this in here. You see that? And now it's becoming functional, right? It's starting to come together. And so for instance, I can say when input text changes, right? I can do something like that. Or I can say when translate is clicked, right? Something like that. And now I can continue doing it. So this is very interesting kind of way of doing it, right? Like you don't really see that often, right? This is why this tool, you're going to think about this tool, right? You're going to have a reaction to this tool. It's not like using, just another no-code tool that, kind of does things very, very similar. This tool makes you think. And to be honest with you, I don't know what my opinion is on this stuff, on these blocks. I think it's very simplified. I understand some people will feel this is a really nice approach. They're going to like it. But I think this is fairly simplified, if you ask me. Although I can see this being used, right? If you're using something like FlutterFlow, of course, you're not going to have access to this. But if somebody that's fairly new to computers, fairly new to no code, then understanding this is going to be very, very helpful, right? And so just to kind of show you how this works, right? We have these control structures, and then we have logic, right? And so I can drag this logic and I can put it in here because this is an if condition, right? After the if condition, after the if block, you need a condition. And so in FlutterFlow, you also have a situation where you need to display conditions, right? You need to test, okay, if this is true, do this. If this is false, do this. If this is true, do this. Else, do that, right? You're also going to have that in FlutterFlow. And so with a lot of these no-code builders, they need to find ways of doing this correctly. In this tool here, it has an if block, and then it has this logic, right? So all this logic is, you see, it's all the same. It's all the same. It has this little insertion point here, right? So this is what gets dragged here. So I can delete that. I can go back to logic, and I can say if true, okay? And then I can change it, or I can have a condition, right? This is very helpful. Next, we have math, okay? This is where you calculate values, right? If something equals to 0, a number, if you want to add 1 plus 1 or add different numbers. You also have text, right? This is where you can join different values. You can set a variable to some value, right? To some text, to some string. You can calculate the length of a string. You have all of these kind of string values, right? You have lists, right? So here you can create a list. You can create a list. You can create an empty list, random list. We have color, device, objects. You can do objects, variables, functions, etc., etc. So lots of interesting things. And then remember our invisible components. Well, they are displayed here, right? We have the Airtable that I dragged and dropped on this screen, right? If I go back to design and I scroll down, I have Airtable. And so here it's invisible, but if you go to blocks, it's not invisible. So I have Airtable right here, and I can do anything. And so I can call Airtable and say get cell. I can also set cell. I can get column. I can do everything, right? I can set Airtable API key to that. And obviously inside of that, I can have something more complex. I can have more blocks that do something, right? Kind of like custom functions in FlutterFlow, because in many situations, you're trying to get a variable, but you need to run that variable through a custom function and only then get the result. So it's kind of like this. Instead, in FlutterFlow, it's more computer science, right? You have code, and it gives you a little bit of an editor, but you still need to write the code, and you can use that AI functionality in order to kind of translate your basic English into computer science code. So you can do that, but it's still going to be code at the end of the day because it generates code. here you have a lot of these Lego pieces, right? A lot of these kind of jigsaw pieces in a way. Here you have text to speech, which is another component that you can use. We have the translator here. And as you can see, we're using these things, right? So for instance, here we have, we can have when translate is click, call translators translate, and then you can set the text. Remember, we have the text that we're displaying. You can set it to the text that you got from here. And outputs, you can set the outputs, but then you're also calling text to speech to speak the result, right? So it's very similar. You're basically calling two functions. You're working on two functions. One translates and one has the text to speech functionality. And so the same thing here. We also have a list viewer, which is what gets displayed when we click on the language, right? When we decide that we want to pick a language. So first we click on the element and then we click on the choice, which is kind of what this select language, and then we have the list viewer. So all of that is done using this, and this is kind of what I remembered. And to be honest with you, I think this is really cool. I think it's kind of simplified, but it's a different approach. It's very interesting. I like the fact that it has this, like when homepage starts. So I can right click, I can say duplicate, I can come in here and I can delete all this, and it's gonna say, well, we're gonna delete everything else, that's fine. And now I can say, well, when homepage opens, or when homepage back button is pressed, or something like that, when you can do that. And so having looked at this, I mean, I like this approach. I think this is an amazing kind of an innovative approach of teaching someone how to build code, teaching someone how to write code. But I'm not gonna lie, I definitely prefer the way FlutterFlow is doing things. I prefer FlutterFlow's way of kind of showing those components. I prefer their way of dealing with those components. And I also prefer FlutterFlow's custom functions, custom actions, and also custom widgets. I think FlutterFlow has done a really good job of kind of bridging the gap between, writing code in Flutter, like really straight to Flutter, and having a no-code tool that kind of handholds you through the process. I think FlutterFlow has done a great way of doing. And so that is that. Now, if we go back to the design, I mean, I cannot say that I'm like a complete fan of how you are designing stuff, right? So let's say I want another label. I'm going to drag it in here, and it gets displayed there. And so let's say I want, okay, so I can scroll down, I can do that, and we have a loading icon. We also have columns, rows. I think FlutterFlow's approach is a little bit more sophisticated, right? I like the fact that it's based on Flutter, and Flutter put a lot of work into making sure that you can design a great UI relatively quickly and easily. And so, yes, I can put a column here, and I can have a column, and then I can add a row in here, and maybe add another column here. And so now I have like a column with a row with a column, and maybe I want to put in a button right here inside a row. Okay, so now I have a button and I have a column, and then I can go to this column and I have the width. And now I have kind of how you design it, right? Which is a hard problem to solve, right? How do you do it, right? FlutterFlow uses something called constraints, and a situation where the parent decides what the child wants, and then, parent tells the child, okay, these are the constraints, and then child can do whatever it wants as long as it meets those constraints. So this is a hard problem to solve, because if you want an easy way to design things, there's a lot of trade-offs to be made. It's not an easy thing to do. And so I always look at how tools solve that problem. And so, I'm designing things. I can't say I love how this looks. I can't say like I'm a huge fan of how this looks right now. I mean, it's possible with some work to make it look good, but I think FlutterFlow's approach is a lot more intuitive, just to be honest with you, because I'm looking at it and I can see, yes, I can design a simple app, but it seems to me that I'm going to be spending a lot more time to kind of design a great app than in Thunkable as compared to FlutterFlow, right? So I also have a list here. I can drag that there, and there's a list, and maybe I can put a text input right there, and now we have a text there. Maybe I can, put it in here. And so now I just dragged a bunch of things, and I'm kind of starting to have a more complex UI, but I can't say I really like the way this looks. I mean, FlutterFlow's approach is great. I can't say it's the best approach I've ever seen, but I do prefer FlutterFlow's approach over this. And so Thunkable's design system here, this design interface, I believe there's a lot of things that it can add. There's a lot of things that it can improve on. I think really their goal here is just to build something that works, right? Because you have this powerful blocks functionality, and that's kind of their selling point, right? They're not claiming that you have a beautiful design interface that's going to allow you to build amazing apps that's going to look like Figma or something. I think that's not what they're going after. I think that they're really going after this kind of blocks. And so the ability to go out and to build relatively simple apps fairly easily. Because if I go back to my kind of dashboard, and let's say we open up another app, here's an e-commerce website. Let's take a look at this website here and see how it looks. And so I'm going to say see inside, and I'm going to go into home. And so this is kind of how it looks. And so I can't say I'm super stoked just by looking at it in terms of the design elements, right? I think there's a lot of work remains. There's a lot of things that you can do, but nevertheless, there's a lot of components that you can add. There's a lot of things that you can do. And so my final thoughts about Thunkable after using FlutterFlow for some time now is that I still like the blocks functionality. I think this is really nice for beginners. Obviously, for someone with some experience, I think it's going to be just oversimplified. Okay, someone for me with some experience doing, code, no code, I think it's a little oversimplified, but I do admit that somebody who has no experience with coding, they're not sure how logic works. They're not sure how logic fits into building these kinds of apps. I think it's going to be very, very useful because it's very easy to start with a event such as this event here. When Instagram is clicked, it's, when the page is open, when the page does this, I think it's going to be very easy and removes a lot of friction for somebody who's new to no code. On the other hand, when we are talking about pure design, I think it definitely leaves a lot to be desired. Having looked at some of these other tools, some of them do have a better way of building the UI. For instance, with FlutterFlow, you can build relatively decent looking screens fairly quickly and easily by using templates, by using some of the built-in pages, by using the existing components. And even if you're just starting out, it's also fairly easy to hit the ground running by just learning basic design fundamentals such as rows, columns, stacks, list view, etc., etc. It's relatively easy in FlutterFlow, and it's also relatively powerful because just by learning some concepts, right, that's going to take you maybe an hour, a couple of hours tops, you can design fairly sophisticated pages, fairly sophisticated components, which is why I like FlutterFlow and Flutter-based no-code builders. Now, what I do like about Thunkable is I like the fact that they give you a lot of data, right? So we have Airtable, we have real-time DB, we also have local storage, we have local DB, we have web API, we have media DB, we also have a file picker, so right, we also have many sensors that you can use. Lots of interesting things. So they're definitely giving you a lot of adapters. And lately, I've been seeing this Airtable adapter in some of the other no-code tools. So maybe FlutterFlow will give you an Airtable adapter in the future, which shouldn't be that complicated. And this is going to be a nice addition because you can store your data in Airtable and access it very, very easily for those who do not want to mess around with Firebase, who do not want to create a Firebase project and just work with data they already have. And so I really like this thing. I really like the fact that we have options. Very, very nice. But still, at the end of the day, I really do prefer FlutterFlow. I really do feel that FlutterFlow kind of gives us the best of both worlds. It's relatively simple to build an app without any code. So beginners love it because you can essentially build any app that you want without using any code if you want. But it's also great if you want to go to the next level. You want to build a custom app, you want to customize an existing app, you want to build a very, very sophisticated app, you want to clone an existing production app and build an app similar to that. It's all, in my view, is going to be much more doable with FlutterFlow than with a tool like Thunkable. And so while Thunkable is a great tool, it shows a lot of promise, I am pretty happy with what FlutterFlow offers right now, and that is something I will continue to use. Now, if you are interested in taking your no-code knowledge to the next level, you want to learn more, you want to build better apps, you want to build those apps faster, you want to leverage on some of the experience that goes into building quality, production-ready, no-code apps, then you definitely want to check out my Patreon community. On my Patreon community, not only will you be able to view and clone all my FlutterFlow apps, as well as some of the other apps that I've built using different app builders, but you also will get access to live streams, Q&As, different series that I do from time to time, as well as my upcoming masterclass, which is going to be an in-depth look into some of the more advanced functionality when it comes to FlutterFlow. And on this upcoming masterclass, I will be talking about different things that I didn't really cover in depth in my existing videos on my channel. So if that is something that you're interested in, you should definitely think about joining my Patreon community. We got an awesome community there, lots of amazing content, and this is also an excellent way of supporting the channel and supporting my work. So I definitely urge you to become a member if you have not done so. And so this is all for today. If you've gotten value in today's video, I definitely urge you to hit the like button, leave a comment below, let me know if you have any questions or comments, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet already, and I will talk to you real soon.